Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ummansi Kurian, and I work with the Health Initiative at ORF. I am delighted to be chairing this panel titled Digital Lifelines, discussing technology and health as part of the annual Sci-Fi 2021. In the next 40 minutes or so, I propose that we start with a round of short opening interventions of about 3 to 4 minutes and follow up with two more questions. In the interest of having diverse insights, the same broad questions will be posed to each of the speakers. For the opening intervention, I now invite Ms. Sheetal Ranganathan. Ms. Ranganathan, during the pandemic, what has been the impact of DigiHealth on accessibility of healthcare? What are some emerging use cases of digital and emerging technologies in healthcare, especially during the pandemic? Ms. Ranganathan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Uman. And first of all, it's really delightful to be a part of this panel with such eminent speakers from diverse fields. So therefore, I'm just hoping that this would be a very good discussion. So particularly coming to the question, I think particularly there are two very important things that have emerged in DigiHealth because of the pandemic. And these are number one, emergence of a connected care system, which all of us have either experienced or implemented in our lives in the last, in the last 1 year or so while living through the pandemic. And the second, since I come also from a company which is more science focused in healthcare, which is on the backstage, emergence of virtual or decentralized trials, which will actually going to change the future also, on what is going to happen or what interventions are going to hit humankind, moving forward. So developing on the first point quickly, when I talk about the connected care system, there are three main things. First of all, telemedicine, and telemedicine not just restricted to e-consultation, which is on the surface of it, right? Which because e-consultation has been made possible with an underlying tech to allow optimal triaging, e-payments, writing e-prescriptions, consumers able to then order online tests, drugs, and therefore staying connected. And I think a great example or a use case within India has emerged in the National Telemedicine Service or eSanjeevani. And it's almost miraculous that a system which was almost, kept muted for about 15, 16 plus years of having developed it has suddenly bloomed into such great size and expanse. So I think if I have to go by the latest figures, which is as latest as last week, around 12 million consultations have been completed in India on this eSanjeevani system, which is averaging about 90,000 patients a day. So not only for India, it is addressing the shortage of doctors, not just during the COVID period, but I think if it continues that way, it would be solving a major problem that we've been facing all through. And also reducing the burden on secondary and tertiary level hospitals. So as I said, it doesn't really stop with e-consultation where the doctor and the patient are face to face or directly, communicating. It has been backed up extensively and beautifully by the remote systems, whether these are IoT devices or mobile health apps. And they are actually proving extremely beneficial in chronic disease management, which took a back foot during COVID era because everybody was just talking about COVID and important and chronic diseases such as someone suffering from cancer or TB or diabetes or cardiovascular disorders. These were turned suddenly called as elective or non-important stuff, which anyways goes on in life. But because of these M health apps or mobile health apps, it has actually been able to enhance the quality of life of people and not miss on very critical treatment while they had been cooped up at home and not being able to visit the health centers. Of course, that has been made possible because of increased network connectivity, habit change, as well as people moving on to adopting smartphones, and so obviously these are not only opportunities but also challenges. So these are the most important variables based on which the adoption of this technology also depends. The other or the third important thing, in the category of connected care system is the emergence of digital public goods, which have been used for populations. So, we have a great example in Covin app, for example, which is a crowd-based IT solution in India. And the way the massive vaccination program has been kept on track and at the same time monitored on a real-time basis is fantastic. So these are the things I believe that could have never developed to this extent. Now, of course, a platform approach has been taken by countries to develop such systems. So, for example, India already had an even system where one could track vaccination, but again, as with any new technology, this was taking its own sweet time to get picked up. But because of the pandemic, I mean, no one could have imagined that everyone would have an Arogya Setu app on the phone in India and would be integrated with the Covin system. So before I stop, just a few seconds on the virtual trials, because seriously, as I said, this is backstage, all action, and so much energy and so much money is spent on developing new interventions or the therapies of future. And the most important aspect of that is taking them through about 6 to 7 years of trials and development. And all that, because of COVID, has actually gone into a completely new paradigm. Not completely, all of it has gone into this new way of working, but there is a start. And I think it's going to be continuing as well as growing over the time, which means that trials or clinical trials have become virtual or decentralized. They are home based or siteless, because trial sites are the most important ones. And all that has been made possible only because of virtual collaboration between researchers and local medical teams and patients who are signing up for these trials. And had it not been for these digital technologies, such facilitation and monitoring of patients on drugs on trial would have certainly not been possible. So I will call it these two as the most important use cases that have emerged because of COVID.
Thank you, Ms. Ranganathan. Let me now invite Ms. Asa Kapoor and pose the same question to her. What are the emerging use cases, and has the DigiHealth really impacted accessibility of healthcare during the pandemic? Ms. Kapoor, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Uman, and thanks, Sheetal, for those opening comments. Very helpful. I think what I wanted to highlight is that, emergencies always do give way to a lot of innovation. And in the context of the COVID crisis, we've really seen, different types of innovation, whether, as Sheetal pointed out, was, on the public digital infrastructure like Covin, or on, other aspects of making digital health accessible or health accessible through digital means. I also think that one of the biggest innovations, and this is not so much innovation in a traditional sense, but the fact that the amount of data sharing that has happened, and that's the view that I'd like to take on my opening comments, is just the role of data that has emerged and during the pandemic. So we've of course noticed that quick sharing of the data between countries led to sequencing very early, and so we were able to improve our diagnosis. There's also been a lot of the vaccines, the mRNA vaccines also came about as a result of very prompt data sharing. The WHO, also learning from the Ebola crisis, had issued statements very early on to ensure collaboration. So all of this movement, and of course recognizing that things like contact tracing became, whether it was Arogya Setu or other apps that were built globally, were also being implemented, sometimes with quite an iron hand. So that's the broad landscape under which innovation has occurred. And there has also been something to think about. So in terms of what has been the cost of all of this, has it actually led to increased access, or has it led to increased barriers because everything is now being mediated through digital? And of course, we can all speak quite, all of us can speak from a personal experience trying to access vaccines through the CoWIN app, and all the struggles that we faced as a result of health access being digitally mediated. And so in that context, I wanted to also make sure that while we recognize that the last 18 to 20 months have been extremely important for new technologies to come in and supplement what was being missed out, and when we were not able to go out and get the things that we needed to. But also new technologies have also meant that access has been radically shifted. The second thing that we must do is that this movement of data that has been happening has also made us extremely vulnerable. There have been cases of huge amounts of data breaches, errant actors accessing location-based data from contact tracing apps, as well as the ways in which some policies have been imposed. So, of course, in India, the National Digital Health ID has been brought about during the pandemic, and we have not had the chance to fully process what that means. So, all of this to say that while the pandemic has led to innovation, it has also increased vulnerabilities in various ways. And that has implications on the way we access health and who accesses health and what is required. Are you able to negotiate in any which way? Earlier, if your doctor is not giving you the attention or you're not able to get the vaccines you need, you're able to negotiate with that. But on CoWIN, nobody had a chance. We were all in the same boat, whether we were digitally literate or not at all. And it took a while for things to, settle down. And of course, there were supply issues, etc. But everything was magnified because of the use of certain digital platforms. So I think that in terms of emerging technologies, I think we have a lot to celebrate. Like I said, the collaborations around data for me are some of the things that we really need to take away from this crisis and institutionalize and make sure that we build robust data sharing systems that are privacy protecting and are driven by a certain social good. But at the same time, we need to be very conscious of what these systems can also enable on a more negative side.
Thank you, Ms. Kapoor. Let me now invite Mr. Andre Kwok for his first intervention. The same question to you, sir.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope my voice is clear. Well, I mean, I am more working from a nonprofit sector that work closely with the government, both in Hong Kong and a few countries in Southeast Asia, like Singapore and Indonesia. I will probably address my comments and viewpoints from policies and also on digital innovation. Especially, we also work closely with fintech and also a few other insurtech that may take on the topic about COVID and health. So one thing we have to really realize is in the last 2 years almost, I think COVID has really sort of polarized the way we understand the world in developed economies and also developing economies. So first of all, taking an example of Hong Kong in the last 2 years, I think COVID has really transformed the nature of jobs, and the transformation of nature of jobs from full-time contract to more populations working as a slasher or part-time or subcontract. Basically, the nature with working from home really changed the nature of how people get paid, and also changed the nature of how people access to their medical insurance and also medical saving. So I think the change of job nature basically also subtly imply the need of change of policies, how people in jobs can access to basic healthcare provided by the public. So, for example, in Hong Kong itself, the new territories, we have been residing over 41% population, but new territories of Hong Kong basically only provide 24% of jobs. So meaning to say, conventionally, there are actually more workforce flowing outside new territories of Hong Kong, but with the COVID, they have to stay at home and probably take freelance. These jobs basically do not provide certain healthcare security. But with the innovation in the last 1 year, there are already popping up of technologies that create and provide micro-insurance for these sort of workforce that work from home, and also those other workforce who have been on contract base that supposed not accessing to any medical insurance. So the innovation on providing micro-insurance to healthcare basically is sort of accelerated by COVID-19 because of the change of job nature. And I think the impact would be definitely permanent. There'll be more and more workforce becoming more contract-based instead of full-time. And also because of the change of jobs nature and the pay scale nature, there will be change of policies as well on social security. And because of the change of social securities, there will be a change of structure of the insurance to healthcare. So I think that's what we have been seeing in Hong Kong as well. But on the other hand, I would raise another example in the Indonesia and also the Philippines, where COVID really hit these two countries largely, that it is a matter of distribution of public resources and also distribution of the public services. That echoed the first two speakers mentioning about the decentralized and also the digitalized public services. I think COVID really make the policymakers rethink about how public services should be redistributed, and also how to leverage digital infrastructure to distribute those public services, such as the healthcare. Especially when we talk about Philippines and Indonesia, these are the two biggest island countries in Southeast Asia, where most of the time civil servants or the government distribute their access to subsidies for healthcare or other medical services by the government, mostly through the bank. And the banking network in Southeast Asia basically is still lagging behind, which many island cities and also many other small and medium-sized cities are basically out of touch by the traditional banking network, which meaning that farmers or other citizens cannot access to the medical subsidies or other medical services. So the digitalization of banking system is highly accelerated this year and last year, and that led to such an increase in the use of digitalization of banking and also the use of mobile banking, which users can access to government subsidies for healthcare easier, and also they can lately 2 months ago, there's the first ever in history of the Philippines, the Microfinance Institute providing digital loans and also credit, meaning the buy now, pay later services, which is also making customers easier to buy and purchase medical services first. So I think these two examples highlight how COVID changed a lot of natures of lifestyle and healthcare.
Thank you, Mr. Kwok. Let me now invite Ms. Francesca Bosco. The same question to you, ma'am. Also, I would request as a cyber security, digital security analyst, if you could focus on the vulnerabilities a bit. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you so much, and many thanks for having me and the Cyber Peace Institute to contribute to such a key discussion. Thanks for the question and also for the opportunity to complete the excellent remarks from the previous distinguished speakers. And actually, let me start with something recent, but that we've seen exacerbating during the pandemic. So we just saw in the news the allegation about a hospital hit by a hacker and a baby in distress. And so basically in an Alabama hospital, it was the first case of alleged ransomware death. Clearly, there is the investigation ongoing. It's hard to imagine anything more cynical, basically, than holding a hospital to ransom, but that's exactly what is happening. And with the healthcare services now highly dependent on technology, as my fellow speakers highlighted, these attacks can lead to postponed surgeries, blocked access to vaccines, and ultimately lives endangered. And imagine being an ambulance which is diverted because of a cyber attack has caused chaos at your local accident and emergency department. Shockingly, it's not a hypothetical situation anymore. So the healthcare sector has been for a long time a popular target for cyber criminals, and the threat has been dramatically growing during the pandemic. And unscrupulous actors want data they can sell or they can use for blackmailing, but their actions are also putting lives at risk. In March 2021, we, the Cyber Peace Institute, produced a report that is called Playing with Lives. Cyber attacks on healthcare are attacks on people. It is a cornerstone of the Cyber for Healthcare program that we put in place answering to the pandemic to assist healthcare professionals analyze attacks and advance policies to protect the sector and people it serves. And as cyber attacks, we have observed that the cyber attacks on healthcare have increased 400% since the start of the pandemic. And tens of millions of records have been stolen of every type, from social security numbers, private details of medical donors, to HIV test results and fertility information. But the key message that I want to highlight is a cyber attack on healthcare is more than an attack on computers or abstract IT system. It is an attack on vulnerable people and the people who are involved in their care. We found that 40% of incidents led to patients being redirected to other facilities, 19% caused appointments to be canceled, and some facilities were unavailable for as much as 73 days. And healthcare cyber attacks can be devastating, and they are on the rise. So we really see a sort of like disproportionate impact on people and organization as a result of ransomware attacks. And these are deeply worrying statistics. And I close by saying that according to a study made by the Vanderbilt Owen School of Management, patients are more likely to die if their hospital has been hit by a cyber attack, and the disruption caused by a cyber attack can sometimes last for years. So just for us to reflect on this.
Thank you, Ms. Bosco. From use cases, now we move to discuss public policy, how governments ensure access, particularly within the pandemic context. Let me start again with Ms. Sheetal Ranganathan. How can the state ensure healthcare services are accessible by design, accounting also for different levels of connectivity, especially during a public health emergency when there is a surge demand? I think this is what Ms. Kapoor has also mentioned, the COVID experience at, the initial days when demand outrun the supply by miles. Ms. Ranganathan, please.
Yeah, sure. So you see, I think COVID has basically, released a knee-jerk reaction to everything. So I understand while, we should, Asta was saying very correctly, we should celebrate these innovations. At the same time, we have to also realize that these innovations of the scale and and the novelty that they brought along, both in terms of technology as well as the adoption. No one had seen anything like this before. Generally such systems go through a proper UAT pathway, which is basically simply for testing. These are tech products. And unless these are tested and stress tested in different conditions, generally such tech products are not rolled out for large scale consumer use. Now, in this, in this scenario, most of it got designed, developed, produced, and just rolled out. So I think we were all, as a nation or as a world, were in the UAT environment where each and every consumer was basically testing it. So obviously, I think this has been a great lesson. I don't think this works. This leads to unpopularity. This leads to loss of trust, both in technology as well as the governments who might be rolling it out in these situations. So it is time to now start working on design. Get out of the crisis control mode, which I think the world is still in, and at the same time gotten into the risk acceptance category also. But I think we have to get into the risk preparation mode, because this would need long term design adjustments. First, in the mindset, and I just sincerely hope this COVID experience is never forgotten, and health is seriously treated as wealth. Even though the risk may not be visibly, just staring in our faces, which is always did, but it just required this pandemic to happen to the human race, right? So that's the mindset. Uh, Another part on the mindset is actually start working on tech. I think people generally used to divide populations into being tech savvy, tech nerdy, but that's not the case anymore. Everybody has to become tech savvy at a scale of, at a scale, at a varied scale. And therefore, for us to help populations, I think the design adjustments that have to be taken cannot be one size fits all. So even at a policy level, a nation can't design products and public goods or solutions that can be applicable to the entire nation unless there is homogeneity. Of course, it is possible for smaller nations, but if I talk about India, which is a continent in itself and so diverse, we must take a cluster approach, and the cluster approach has to be defined by a mix of several indices, such as the digital savviness of a particular city or a state, um, the operational and structural realities that the state might be facing in terms of what exists and where it has to reach in terms of health infrastructure and availability of resources. And most importantly, the epidemiology profiles. Even though we are the same nation, depending upon the socio-economic development status of a particular city or a state, the kind of or health crisis that can turn into unfathomable situations can be very different. So urban areas are facing, because of a higher level of hygiene, and different pollution levels, they may be facing more of non-communicable diseases, risk profiles, whereas in rural areas where hygiene is a big issue, might be at a risk of a high propensity of infectious diseases. So again, I think the product design as well as implementation of solutions have to take all this into account. We have to get customized as far as possible. Um, and of course, the deployment of it will depend upon internet connectivity and smartphone penetration. So it has to be an ecosystem approach. It cannot just be a pure healthcare infrastructure and resources approach. Of course, India, this is improving. I mean, half of the nation already possesses a smartphone, and the way the numbers are growing, the the estimates are that about 800 million people will have a smartphone, which takes the population coverage to more than 65% or so. So all this has to be taken into account. At the same time, one also needs to see certain things that people don't look at. So, what is the tourism and intercity movement, for example? COVID has again shown us that at least for infectious diseases, the more people travel, the spread is higher and faster. Similarly, governance law, flexibility of intercity collaboration, as well as culture, all this will have to be taken into account at the design level itself to be able to roll out solutions. And, that would be my thesis. Yeah, happy to hear from everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Ranganathan. Let me invite Ms. Asta Kapoor to share her opinion about how state can ensure healthcare services are accessible to majority of the population.
Yeah, I think I just want to take off from where Sheetal left, which is the idea of the ecosystem. I think that that's something that we as a country have not really built up. India has very poor investments in health. I think it's less than 2% of the GDP, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure, Oman, you know the number, but that we make very, very few investments in health. I think that we need to think more critically about the approach. So if digital is indeed the way forward, how do we think about creating an ecosystem which is not just about making an app? It's much more about preparing the population to onboard onto these platforms. So there's a huge amount of investment required in literacy, in training, in making sure that your state architecture, whether it's the feet on the street from from the last mile to government offices in Delhi, are all able to understand technology, are able to navigate technology, and also serve as a bridge between citizens and technology. What we have seen happen as part of COVID, which is also what I said earlier, is that there's been almost that the state is felt like it can recede because there's a technology layer between people and the state. And that is never an effective strategy. The state needs to be actively involved in hand-holding and making sure that people are able to access technology. And there's a huge role for government and non-government intermediaries, civil society organizations, all of that. And there needs to be a much broader bottom-up movement to facilitate the use of technology. It can't be something that you impose top down and expect people to just sort of line up and start to use these things. The other thing, which goes back to what also Andre was saying, is about the policy ecosystem. What are we doing at the policy level to enable all of this digital access and use? In India, as we know, we don't have a personal data protection framework. So to what Francesca was saying, there's a huge amount of data vulnerability. You cannot impose a digital health architecture where people's data is not safeguarded, where you don't have rights on your data. Similarly, we don't have a robust health data sharing system, so we don't have standards, interoperability. We don't have a way for hospitals to move data around, though all of that is being built now with the National Digital Health System or Health Mission. But these are things that need to exist before we roll out mass-based, population-scale digital health programs. So I think that the broader ecosystem, both that is offline, so that is about the people and making sure that they're able to do it at the state level, as well as at the policy level, is required. And we need to create mechanisms of trust in technology. Right now, the idea of trust in technology is extremely poor. And it gets worse when you realize, oh, Arogya Setu is not working, CoWIN is not working, all of these apps are not working. You read about data breaches. I'm boggled to hear about, Francesca, the study that you mentioned, that access to healthcare is so deeply influenced by your data security. So I think those kinds of things need to be highlighted, and only then in a country like India should we embark upon, and I'm not saying it's almost like a chicken and egg. If you don't do it, you won't have access. And I understand, but like Shefali said, I think that we have to draw these lessons from the COVID experience. We have to prepare much, much better. Reactive decision making is not something we can afford, because that is where exclusion happens, and that exclusion is a matter of life and death.
Thank you, Ms. Kapoor. Coming to you, Mr. Andre Kwok, for your comments on the role of government in ensuring access. The floor is yours.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think I will make it short. I think building upon what Aska and also Sheetal talk about ecosystem. I think government does play a leading role in policy making, especially what I would call policy innovation. Especially, I would pinpoint the insurance, because in multiple key economies, say Hong Kong or mainland China or even Singapore, insurance basically is the major pillar that supports a big chunk of the healthcare system in the nationwide. So insurance needs to be innovate, and also the way insurance collaborate with pension system and the way it collaborate with social security system, how tax is being collected from daily workers, and how tax are being covered to not just professionals but also grassroots workers are super important. So I would say if we expand the scope of ecosystem, then that will be definitely the grassroots workers and also those bottom of the pyramid. How data basically can include them in the insurance and also in the pension system, the wider scheme, so that they can access better healthcare. That would be the key. So I think government play a key role, not just look at the profit maximization, but also in the social inclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Kwok. Coming to you, Ms. Bosco, your comments on the role of the state.
Thank you so much. And well, actually, I can say that what we have identified during the pandemic, and thanks to our Cyber for Healthcare program, and specifically thanks to the report, is that I can highlight, let's say, three main gaps. One gap is that the healthcare isn't universally categorized as a critical infrastructure, and it should be. So accessibility, as my colleague said before, starts with security. Normal healthcare solutions, let alone digital and networked ones, can't function when disrupted by cyber attacks. So we've been collecting and analyzing data on healthcare cybersecurity attacks going back to June 2020. And our analysis showed that 69% of countries for which we have recorded attacks against healthcare have classified health as a critical infrastructure. Is not enough. And healthcare is a key sector that vulnerable communities rely on, and disruption can lead to loss of life. So states need to designate healthcare as a critical infrastructure and work to ensure security so malicious actors can't disrupt care and impact people's life. Also, many healthcare facilities don't have resources to handle such disruptions. So clearly, there are many short-term solutions that we have also seen during the pandemic, but governments need to take action. And states are often not in consensus on how to adequately implement and follow norms and international law. So there needs to be a clear standard on making attacks against healthcare off limits and holding perpetrators accountable for their attacks on healthcare. And this is also an important part because some states are still not holding criminal attackers to account for action on healthcare, and they need to. There are debates on the applicability, for example, of due diligence principle to investigating attackers, and therefore, to protect healthcare, this needs to be implemented.
Thank you, Ms. Bosco. This has been a really insightful discussion. As you can see, we are quickly running out of time. I now invite the speakers to give their closing remarks, summing up the legal and policy gaps as well as ethical and normative enablers for better trusted healthcare delivery. Please take not more than 2 minutes. Ms. Ranganathan, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Oman. So I think we talked about a range of issues here. What I would like to take the concluding remarks slot to add in another point or squeeze in another point would be that, digital is changing the way we experience healthcare or the way healthcare will be delivered in future in mind-boggling ways. And therefore, all the issues that we spoke about and we just, touched in terms of just probably naming the issues like data security, data privacy, and, the kind of attacks that Francesca talked about, those are like crossing scary limits. At all points in time, I think the solution has to be made even at a unit level and then at a population level to be kept patient-centric. And if patient centricity is kept in mind, then obviously it's not just about the healthcare needs of the patient and not just about the accessibility and affordability of the solution, but issues like data security and data privacy should also be taken into mind by developers of these solutions and by policymakers who are going to be the regulators of these solutions. I think that's what I would like to close, because patient is the prime person we are serving here.
Ms. Kapoor, the floor is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to agree with again, Sheetal. So good to come at her heels on a lot of this, but that I think that we do need to make sure that patients and patient-centric healthcare is at the heart of it, and also to make sure that we are, trust is an interesting word, and we need to create systems. And I think that the start of that is by making sure that we build a trusted policy architecture that allows people to hold the state accountable, the private sector accountable, and actually, exist with rights in the digital healthcare ecosystem. So to that, the personal data protection to me is absolutely critical. I think we definitely need that, and also other rights around, sensitive personal data such as health data needs to be codified much better, and people need to be able to hold, like I said, different stakeholders accountable, and that will help build trust in the process.
Thank you, Ms. Kapoor. I think we are moving towards a multi-stakeholder approach with the patient at the core. Coming to you, Mr. Kwok, your closing remarks, please.
Thank you, and I definitely agree the multi-stakeholder and also the mindset of always bearing the patient in mind, the centric. I think if I have to only give one message at the end, I think the economics of healthcare has to be rethink and also has to be renovated, because our healthcare system is not just digitally vulnerable, but basically our healthcare system is too much intercorrelated to many other risky industries. If we look at East Asia, like how Japanese pension fund and also other government public resources that are highly linked to other risky capital markets. So one domino effect would be enough to destroy our long-term healthcare system financially. So I think at the end, I would go back to economics and how digitalization, how cybersecurity, and the right policy intervention that maintain the right innovation and sustainability would be the key. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kwok. Coming to you, Ms. Bosco. I mean, the scary stories that we hear about data security and digital mobsters, so to speak. Is there hope going forward in terms of security and privacy?
Thank you so much for the question. And yes, let me say yes, there is hope. And it's exactly thanks to this panel and this type of dialogues that we can plan and then move to action. And some quick recommendation on top of my mind is, first of all, better document attacks and analysis and analyze their human and societal impact. I really liked what you summarized as a sort of like the need for a multi-stakeholder approach with having patients basically at the heart, at the core of the debate and of the approach. Improve the healthcare sector preparedness and resilience. So basically strengthen the cybersecurity of healthcare infrastructure, increase the healthcare capacity and capabilities, and also improve healthcare preparedness to attacks. And we need to activate both what I would call technical and legal instruments to protect the healthcare. So reinforce the legal and normative ecosystems, as we've heard, but also improve information sharing and reporting standards. And then last but not least, since you mentioned it also in your question, actually hold the threat actors to account.
Thank you, Ms. Bosco. Thank you so very much to our brilliant panelists today for their informed takes on perhaps some of the most important policy questions within healthcare today. Fighting the healthcare divide using digital tools, at the same time trying to overcome the digital divide itself, can be a policy minefield. I'm sure inputs of our great panel will inform policy in a meaningful way in the months and years to come. As always, ORF will come back with a publication summarizing the discussion and insights. Thank you for your time. Thanks so very much for being with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.